The Reserve Bank keeps interest rates on hold, meaning no more hikes until at least next February. New car sales are set to hit a record in 2023, and there's a battle to the finish line for the top-selling vehicle title. And there's a crisis brewing in the coffee industry. Welcome to Fear and Greed Business News, Australia's best business podcast. It is Wednesday, the 6th of December, 2023. I'm Michael Thompson, and good morning, Sean Aylmer.
Good morning, Michael. I hope you noticed in that introduction we had a crisis brewing in the coffee industry. We had a race to the finish line in the car industry. It's just full of alliteration today.
Yeah, nice. Actually, I'm intrigued by the coffee story. I'm a little bit worried about the coffee story, but we'll get to that one a little bit later on. I suspect you're going to make me wait until the end. And after the podcast, Sean, you have an interview with Rainer Ender, who is the global head of private equity at Schroders.
Yes, basically it's a 101 on private equity investing. We talk a lot about it and we just assume we know that people know what we're talking about. But we ask Rainer about the assets involved, the risks, the returns, how people can invest in private equity, how much money you need, all sorts of things like that. It's a great chat about PE.
Yeah, it's a great chat for someone like me who no longer needs to bluff their way through a private equity conversation because I've listened to this interview and now I understand what we're talking about. So it's very, very handy. It's coming up a little bit later on. But the main story this morning, Sean, the Reserve Bank has kept the official interest rate on hold, and if it increases in 2024 will very much depend on whether the inflation rate keeps falling towards the central bank's target band.
As Michelle Bullock, the Reserve Bank governor, put it, the bank is resolute when it comes to inflation. The bank will keep looking at the global economy, trends domestically, and the outlook for inflation and employment. Now, this is the last meeting of the Reserve Bank Board this year, so that means we are pretty much off the hook at least until next February. Mind you, we have had 14 rate rises in the past 18 months, adding nearly $2,000 per month to a $750,000 mortgage repayment. The Aussie dollar fell 1/4 cent against the US dollar after the decision to be trading back under 66 US cents. That's because traders reckon the Reserve Bank's comments are what they call dovish, suggesting rates might not rise again at all. Bond yields, which are a reflection of interest rate expectations, also fell, with the 3-year rate down 6 basis points to 4%. Federal Treasurer Jim Chalmers welcomed the announcement, saying Australia is making encouraging progress in the fight against inflation.
Sean, what did the Reserve Bank say yesterday? Are they happy with how the economy's going, particularly inflation, I suppose?
Well, the board statement released yesterday afternoon says the domestic economy over the past month has been broadly in line with expectations, and it notes that the October inflation reading shows inflation is continuing to moderate. But, and it is a big but, Anyway, the Reserve Bank said the October reading doesn't say much about services inflation, which is what the central bank is most worried about. Interest rates are working, the bank says, and the impact of recent hikes will continue to flow through to the economy. Bottom line, no more rate hikes till February at the earliest, and there's quite a few economists in the market who think there might not be any more rate hikes, full stop. In fact, some are even talking about rate cuts next year.
Oh, that's optimistic. Now, how did local markets perform yesterday?
It was a pretty rough day, with the S&P ASX 200 falling nearly 1% to 7,062 points following a sell-off on Wall Street. The local markets made some pretty decent gains over the past fortnight, so maybe a pullback wasn't totally unexpected. Yesterday, energy and materials stocks led the market lower. Real estate investment trusts and consumer discretionary companies were also sold off. Of the 11 sub-indices in the ASX 200, only utilities ended higher, while healthcare was flat. BHP, Fortescue Metals and Rio all dropped by more than 1%. National Australia Bank was higher, but the other major banks were lower. Woodside was off 2.5%. Santos was down 1%. The gold companies, Newmont and Northern Star, fell sharply, while Xero and REA were also much lower. Woolies and Coles were among the best performers. Interesting one yesterday, Origin Energy. Post the failed shareholder vote on Monday, it was the best performer of the top 200, rising 2.5%. Worst were the miners, with core lithium down nearly 10%. In corporate news yesterday, Evolution Mining will pay a Chinese company almost $720 million for the lion's share of the North Parkes copper and gold mine in central western New South Wales.
Was there any movement yesterday afternoon after the Reserve Bank board meeting, or does a hold decision not result in too much movement?
Broadly, it was really expected. So things happen when there's an unexpected result. Now, after 2:30, the ASX 200 jumped, but it sort of jumped about 20 points thereabouts. And it finished a little higher than where it was trading at 229, but not a lot higher.
Okay. All right. What's happening in international markets?
Global shares have pulled back somewhat, with the big Wall Street tech stocks suffering. Yesterday morning, Tesla, Nvidia, Microsoft, Amazon and Meta all fell fairly sharply, really. Oil steady, gold remains around record levels. Equities might have fallen over the past 36 hours, but Bitcoin has held on to gains. It's buying around $42,000 a unit, another 19-month high. That crypto asset is up 150% this year.
All right. We'll be back in a moment with the rest of the day's business news. Sean, a third non-citizen released from indefinite detention after last month's High Court ruling has been arrested, upping the political crisis hitting the Albanese government.
Victorian police yesterday arrested a former ringleader of a child exploitation gang. It came after a man was arrested in Adelaide on indecent assault charges, and in Sydney, a man was arrested for alleged minor drug offences. This is becoming a bit of a mess for the government. Now, the opposition is calling for the resignation of Home Affairs Minister Claire O'Neil and Immigration Minister Andrew Giles. The most recent arrests come after 148 non-citizens were released from indefinite detention by order of the High Court. This final week in Canberra is totally dominated by the government's handling of the consequences of that High Court decision. The government, with the support of the opposition, will pass laws by the end of the week enabling the preventative detention of any of the ex-detainees who have been convicted in a foreign or domestic court of a serious violent or sexual offence, which carries a penalty of either life in jail or at least 7 years. But until then, the government is sustaining a fair bit of collateral damage.
Sean, this next one is big news, I suppose. King Charles III will make his first trip to Australia as monarch late next year, marking his and Queen Camilla's first visit in 6 years.
Are you a royalist, Michael?
Oh, I do. I find the whole family and the whole institution fascinating. Yes. I really do. I love all the tradition and everything attached to it. And I find it really interesting to see the way people respond and the respect or lack of respect for it. I like to watch it.
Right.
So that was a long way of saying I'm a bit of a voyeur, Sean.
Yeah, right. I'm not. I mean, I'm a Republican. Totally. I think it's ridiculous that we have people in England as our head of state. However, I love King Charles III. Now, Jackie, my partner, it's beyond her how I can like King Charles III. She kind of likes some of the other royals, but definitely not King Charles III. I just think he's wacky. I just think he's been out there, a little left of centre for a long, long time. And I like my king being just a little bit wacky. What do you reckon?
Well, it certainly adds a little bit of unpredictability to it, doesn't it?
Yes.
Because when you've had the Queen who was so stable for such a long period of time, suddenly you've got a monarch who's willing to have a say on a few different things and may not say exactly what you're expecting.
You know, there's a great story. Sean Turnell, who was a friend of mine who was detained in Myanmar for it was more than a year. He was. We had this on Fear and Go. We put it on our Instagram account. I think it was a picture of Sean with King Charles III and Sean's partner Ha. And Sean was talking about meeting King Charles III, and he said he was a very, very normal person. And he said, "Look, I'd like to say things, but the crowd out there pointing to the antechamber or the other room or whatever, they won't let me, so I can't say too much about it." And I thought that was pretty cool, actually. My regard for him went even higher as a result of that.
Well, have you seen the video as well? It went kind of viral of some kind of, I think they're like mountain bike riders kind of riding through the countryside near Balmoral or one of those kind of places. And they're just riding along, and all of a sudden they stumble upon the king, who is just out for a bit of a bushwalk and just there having a chat to him. He's just talking to them about, where have you ridden from today and how you're finding the weather and all this, just as normal as anything. And they've just been riding along and they've just encountered the king. It's just amazing. I see. This is what I mean. It's fascinating. The whole thing is just fascinating that we just have this ancient kind of monarchy that is still existing and still kind of going on, and it's kind of interacting with modern life, and it just creates these bizarre encounters.
So we think that King Charles and Camilla are coming next year. The Sydney Morning Herald and Age are reporting the trip. Certainly it'll test the popularity of the sovereign. Now, the most recent Resolve Political Monitor survey of support for becoming a republic, conducted in the weeks after Queen Elizabeth's death, found 54% of Australians said no and 46% said yes to Australia becoming a republic. Australia is one of 14 countries, including the United Kingdom, where Charles is head of state. One of 14 countries where Charles is head of state. Oh dear. I'm going to get on my high horse. I'll move on. Any royal visit would coincide with the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting, CHOGM, in Samoa. That's due to start on October 21 next year. So it's probably, sort of just before that or at the end of it.
Sean, Israel has raised its travel warning for people coming to Australia, saying there's a potential threat to Jews following demonstrations against the Gaza war across the country.
Australia was included among a swathe of countries including Britain, France, Germany, Brazil, Argentina and Russia, for which travel advice was raised to level 2, recommending Israelis take extra precautions when visiting. The US remains at level 1, which is basically no threat. Israel's National Security Council said that since the beginning of the war, there have been increased efforts identified from Iran and its affiliates, including Hamas and Islamic Jihad, to target Israelis and Jews around the world. A number of pro-Palestinian rallies in Australia have included anti-Semitic elements. Last week, pro-Palestinians targeted a Melbourne hotel where Israeli family members of murder victims and hostages of the attack had been staying. And on Sunday, a neo-Nazi rally was held in Ballarat in regional Victoria.
Westpac says normal services resumed early yesterday morning after an outage due to a software upgrade. Not another software upgrade issue here, Sean. We've had enough of these with Optus.
Yes, afraid so. The bank started posting updates on X at about 9 p.m. Monday night about problems with mobile and online banking services. Customers complained that they weren't able to see their accounts after logging into Westpac's app. More than 10,000 people reported problems accessing their accounts. That's according to outage website Down Detector.
Sean, Fortescue has shipped its first batch of African iron ore, just as rival miner Rio Tinto said it would spend $500 million proving up the Pilbara's next big mine to achieve first ore by 2030.
Yes, plenty going on. Fortescue's first ship departed from the Gabonese capital of Libreville this week, carrying ore from the Belinga Iron Ore Project, according to the Financial Review. The shipment comes just 10 months after Fortescue signed a mining convention with the Gabonese government, which was subsequently overthrown by a military coup in August. It isn't really a major play for Fortescue, more of a proof of concept. Just interesting that they have been able to get ore out. Meanwhile, Rio said it would spend $110 million on a pre-feasibility study for the Rhodes Ridge mine in Western Australia's Pilbara region. Rhodes Ridge will be a large high-grade mine that's expected to be the backbone of Rio's flagship Australian iron ore division in the future. Now, the first ore is not expected until the end of this decade, Rio said in a statement. What I think is amazing about this is a pre-feasibility study. So it's not a feasibility study, a pre-feasibility study. And Rio is going to spend $110 million on that pre-feasibility study. A lot of money.
Yeah, certainly is. Now, Bank of Queensland shareholders gave the board a first strike on its remuneration report after a pretty dreadful year, really, for the regional bank.
Several influential voting advisory groups recommended against re-electing Bruce Carter to the board, citing regulatory issues, including actions taken by the Australian Prudential Regulation Authority and the Financial Crimes Authority last year. Those actions led to the appointment of an external auditor and forced the bank to set aside additional capital. Now, Bank of Queensland reported a 70% drop in statutory profits in the past year. It removed its CEO, George Frazee. Now, George was replaced by Patrick Allaway, who's the chair. They had backed George Frazee for large financial rewards only weeks before they got rid of him. BOQ's share price is down nearly 40% since October 2021. Has not been a good investment.
And finally, Sean, the title for best-selling car of the year is a lot closer in 2023 with the 7-year winner, the Toyota Hilux, in a neck-and-neck race. Never thought of cars as really having necks, but with the Ford Ranger.
Yes. Do cars have necks?
I don't think so.
Anyway, Australians are on track to buy a record number of new cars this year, despite the cost of living pressures and high petrol prices. A record 112,141 new cars were delivered in November, putting the full year number on track to hit 1.1 million sales. In November, the Ranger was the number one selling vehicle, and for the first 11 months of the year, the Hilux is ahead by just 379 vehicles. I think that's neck and neck, and we'll go neck and neck. Utes took out the top three spots in November. The Isuzu D-Max came in at number 3, while Tesla's Model Y electric SUV was the number one passenger car last month. Across all makes, Toyota is way ahead of number 2 manufacturer, selling 196,000 vehicles so far, more than twice as many as Mazda, that number 2. Then comes Ford, Kia, Hyundai, and Mitsubishi. The fastest growing brand is easily Tesla, up more than 150% for the year. It's now the 8th largest car brand in terms of sales.
Turning to international news now, and Israeli tanks and armoured vehicles have appeared on the outskirts of the South Gaza city of Khan Yunis, with the military continuing to push southwards.
Israel says it's continuing to push that way to cover all areas of the Palestinian territory, according to the BBC. The Israeli Defense Force has given new evacuation orders in Gaza, though aid groups say that people are running out of places to flee to. The number of displaced people in Gaza has almost doubled to 1.9 million in less than 3 weeks, according to the United Nations. All internet and communications services are down across the region. In Gaza's Hamas-run health ministry says more than 15,800 people have been killed in Israel's retaliatory campaign. That campaign came after Hamas's unprovoked attack on Israel on 7 October. That attack killed 1,200 people and 240 were taken hostage.
Finally, Sean, I mentioned this story at the top of the show, and as expected, you did make us wait till the very end to get to it. There is a coffee shortage in Vietnam, the world's largest grower of the Robusta variety used in instant drinks and espressos and things like that. And it's going to put pressure on prices across the board.
Yeah, now I'm paying almost $5 for a regular flat white, which I'm not happy about. And this story gets me even more angry. Vietnamese coffee exports are being squeezed by a smaller output, almost no stockpiles, and much stronger local demand. Robusta futures in London climbed to their highest level since at least 2008. Earlier this year on supply shortages, they also had the biggest gain last month since January, according to Bloomberg. Total coffee acreage in Vietnam is probably about 600,000 hectares, according to the Vietnam Coffee Cocoa Association. The previous estimate was about 700,000 hectares. Basically, farmers have cut down coffee trees for more profitable crops such as durians and avocados. What's all this grind down to, Michael? Your daily coffee might be about to get more expensive.
I'll give you points for the grind pun there.
The effort.
Yeah, it's just, I mean, you tried very hard and it was very good. But just briefly, on the topic of coffee, we are, of course, one of our supporters is Voodoo X Coffee. And we discussed this on the weekend edition, that Voodoo X Coffee, I think, is the strongest coffee in the country. And I sent you and our colleague, Adam Lang, a picture of my coffee art after I had done a very, very nice, very elegant looking fern in my coffee. And neither of you responded. And I don't want to be petty, but my feelings were a little bit hurt. And so I said, I reckon I'll get a better response from Instagram. And so I put it on the Fear and Greed Instagram account. And the response was overwhelming in terms of people liking it and applauding it and just generally giving me the reaction that I expected from my supportive colleagues but did not get.
Well, I did send you eventually the picture of me. It was just a blob on top of the creme. So I was too ashamed to support you.
Yeah, well, I didn't put that on Instagram. I may end up doing that just to embarrass you. I'll put the two side by side, but I wouldn't do that because I'm too nice a person for that, even if you don't respond to my messages when I send them. Anyway, Sean, up next is the Fear and Greed daily interview. You're speaking today with Raina Ender, Global Head of Private Equity at Schroders.
All about private equity, what it is, how you invest in it, the risks, the rewards, all those sorts of things. If you're interested in investing, especially in private equity, well worth a listen.
Yeah, it certainly is. It is coming up next in the Fear and Greed playlist on your podcast platform or at fearandgreed.com.au. And of course, today is Wednesday, which means there is a new episode of our sister podcast, How Do They Afford That? Which is all about making your money work a little bit harder for you. And Sean, speaking of investing, it's a very investing themed show today. How do they afford that? And I'll put a link in today's show notes so that you can find that. But we actually have a special guest join us in the studio. And the guest today is Peter Thornhill, who is the author of Motivated Money. But anyway, he is Canna Campbell, who's my co-host on the show. He's actually Canna's money mentor. And he takes us through how he built an investment portfolio starting when he was about 51 years old. So it's not as though he'd been doing this since he was kind of in his 20s. He started it when he was in his 50s, and it is now worth about $10 million. And he took us through how he did it. So it's a fascinating conversation. It is well worth a listen if you're interested in investing. So I'll put a link in show notes, and you can find How Do They Afford That wherever you listen to podcasts as well. Thank you very much, Sean.
Thank you, Michael.
It is Wednesday, the 6th of December, 2023. Make sure you're following the podcast and please join us online on LinkedIn, Instagram, X and Facebook. I'm Michael Thompson and that was Fear and Greed Business News. Have a great day.